What's up guys, Agent here with, interestingly, a PTS video of all times here. So as you guys might have seen on the communities tab post that I made, I think at this point about 2 days ago, PTS has been down for about a week, and today we figured out why that was the case. They are actually implementing some new light and heavy attack changes on the PTS that they want us to test out here for them. This is the off cycle, so we're not getting any sort of Greymore patch notes. This is strictly just changes to light and heavy attacks that they are interested in testing out and getting feedback on. So this week we will be taking a look at these changes here, and I will be releasing several videos just sort of showcasing what these changes look like and sort of giving my own personal feedback through these videos as well. So this first set of videos is going to be taking a look at the patch notes. So I said set of videos because I want to split this up into two separate videos. The first one, which is this video, is going to be a lot more objective. So we're taking a look at the changes that are made, basically summarizing them and explaining more or less what the impacts are going to be for specific builds. This is stuff that is objective. So this is not really something that you can say, oh, but this or that, I feel like this. This is definitely just more of a, this is what is happening, this is what is going to result from this. It's very much a cause and effect sort of video. Tomorrow's video is going to be a more subjective view on things. So that was going to be more based on what I think these changes mean for the health of the game, what these changes mean for sort of end game players, how it's going to impact casual players, mid-level players, high-end players, and so on. So that's going to be a lot more subjective, a lot more opinion oriented. So I do not want to necessarily release that video early because I do want to test things out first in order to get an idea of kind of how these changes are going to affect combat. For these sort of more opinionated pieces, I do kind of want to get a more grounded sense of where things are standing, get some data in, get some feedback in, not just from my own testing, but from other people as well, just to kind of get a sense of kind of how things are shaping out before I generate these opinions, because opinions can be very strong, so I do want to make sure that my priors are, accurate at the very least with that video. So that's going to be coming out tomorrow. So let's go ahead and jump straight into the patch notes. So as always, you'll be able to find a link to these patch notes in the description below. You will also be able to find your way onto the public test server on the official forums if you guys want to give feedback on that sort of medium. You'll also find two other informal discords, first one being Nephis and Atsona's ESO Academy. That is sort of geared towards teaching players how to get into endgame veteran content, and the other one's going to be Toxic Raiding Environment, which is a little bit less formal. It's definitely a lot more casual, a lot more memey, but there's still a lot of endgame players in both discords that will be able to give you guys an idea of how the endgame community is reacting to these patch notes, as well as get some data. So there's a lot of people who are testing things out on both of these discords, so you will be able to get a sense of where data is coming from, what tests are kind of showing up, things like that. Let's dive right into patch notes. So really quickly, they give us first a summary of kind of what's going on here. So kind of a little bit of a brief background first. They note that combat in ESO is action-oriented, fast-paced. It's very different from other MMOs, where a lot of MMOs have ability cooldowns, like you activate an ability, you can't use it for 5 seconds. ESO doesn't have ability cooldowns. If you include ultimates, then yeah, they have some cooldowns because you have to build ultimate, but for the most part, ESO is centered around managing resources instead, so you can't just spam abilities because eventually you'll run out of magicka or stamina. So that's kind of how they get around the whole lack of ability cooldowns. But they do know that there are a couple of drawbacks to this model. Mainly, they use something called actions per minute, or APM. That players with higher APM have much better sort of DPS performance than people with low APMs. And while they recognize that there is a skill gap and that a skill gap can be healthy, they also think the gap is much too wide at the moment. They're trying to find a way to close that gap here, particularly to help improve the performance of those people with low APMs. So they made changes to both light and heavy attacks in order to sort of address this gap that they're seeing. So the quick summary, sort of the 101 version, is light attacks restore resources, heavy attacks do not. Light attack damage has been reduced, heavy attack damage has been buffed, and all attacks now interact with off balance depending on their nature. So light attacks will get more resource return, and heavy attacks and their reintroducing medium attacks will damage. So that's kind of the really just baseline. Here is what is changing. So we'll also note that they do introduce something known as medium attacks. This has not been a thing for the past 3 years. The last time medium attacks were actually a thing were back in 1 Tamriel. So once Homestead and Morrowind patches came about, medium attacks widely fell out of use because there was really no reason to use them anymore because they were basically treated essentially as light attacks. So that is basically more or less the big picture changes here. Now, going into more details, they do go into more details in the patch notes. But first, quick emphasis here, and I will repeat this at the end of the video, that these changes are not necessarily going to stick as you see here. They are testing and gathering feedback. Whether or not these changes make it to the Greymoor patch, which is the next patch, or a future DLC patch, remains to be seen. So if you have strong opinions about the patch notes, it is recommended that you give feedback to Zos, primarily through the PTS, through the in-game /feedback, but also through official forums if you can. Now on to the patch notes. So going right all down here, everything here. Light, medium, and heavy attacks now scale with your highest offensive stat. So now this does mean that you can use things like dual swords on magic DPS without losing that much damage on your light attacks anymore. So dual wield swords used to be a thing about 2.5 to 3 years ago, particularly for Magic Templars for PvE, where you would dual wield swords for the additional damage done bonuses. Of course, that does mean you give up light attack damage from losing out on an Inferno staff, but now that light, medium, and heavy attacks scale off your highest offensive stats, you might be able to run dual swords now on magic DPS without taking that big of a hit to your light attacks. Now, do keep in mind that your light attack, if you decide to go dual wield, will not scale off of your CPs. Generally speaking, Magicka DPS will have magic-oriented CPs, while dual wield light attacks still deal physical damage. You're not getting any sort of CP buffs that way, but it does make it a lot more viable to run dual swords if you kind of want to go for a sort of spell sword kind of build. All weapon-based light attacks will restore 200 stamina or magicka per hit depending on their type. So martial weapons restore stamina, magical weapons restore magicka. Werewolf light attacks restore 250 stamina, and if you use light attacks in succession, they will increase the resources stored by its base value. So if you use 2 light attacks in a row, you'll basically double that much. So you'll get 400 stamina or magicka back. Light attack ability, you'll only get 100. Now here is a little bit weird because they say you can get a maximum of 3 stacks, but they also say that normal light attacks will restore 1,000 resources with 5 stacks. So not sure what's happening here, whether it's a typo on Gina's part or what's going on here, but needless to say, light attacks basically restore a fair amount of resources now per hit. You can essentially treat this as an additional roughly 200 stamina magicka additional regeneration if you're able to light weave very well. Heavy attacks don't restore any resources anymore. They decrease the damage of light attacks by about 78%. So this is a pretty big nerf to the damage of light attacks now. So don't expect to see light attacks making up 20% of your DPS anymore. Probably going to be closer now to maybe 8 or 7% of DPS. So this does punish more or less light attack weavers. So people really emphasize light attack weaving, which is pretty much all endgame DPS classes. Now you're going to see a huge DPS drop. Partially charged heavy attacks, also known as medium attacks, will scale at the same damage as light attacks starting off, and then they'll scale up to a full heavy attack damage. So if you do a medium attack, you'll always deal more damage than a standard light attack, but you will never deal as much damage as a fully charged heavy attack. So that's basically what the medium attack is. It's kind of somewhere in the middle. You didn't fully charge a heavy attack, but you kind of like let it go a little bit early, so you do more damage that way. That's actually how medium attacks used to work, I believe. Heavy attacks now do varying damage based on their cast time and are built to always deal approximately 10% more DPS when weaving them with abilities when compared to light attack weaving. They have the exact numerical adjustments below: dual wield 31%, bow 12%, one-handed shield 24%, two-handed 62%. Rest of staves have been reworked a little bit. They get 2 dot ticks and then a final damage tick. Final damage tick does 238% more damage. Unarmed attacks deal 24% more damage. Werewolf heavies do 2%. Volan Drugs does 22.7%, and they also have appropriate scaling for medium attacks now. Inferno and Frost staves deal 12% more damage, Lightning staves deal 34% more on the channel dot portion, and the final hit does 190% more damage. Now, some of these also will no longer reduce your movement speed while charging, so the bows and your staves. Normally, when you do a heavy attack, you are kind of in, I don't want to call it a snare, but your movement speed is reduced. Now it is no longer pretty helpful there for those of you guys who do like to heavy attack on your restless staves or on your lightning staffs, for example. So generally speaking, across the board, buffs for heavy attacks, some more than others, depending on how long you are casting your heavy attacks for. So for example, dual-wield heavy attacks are generally speaking pretty quick, so those receive a smaller buff than two-handed heavy attacks, which are, relatively speaking, fairly long. Now, some of these heavy attacks did see a reduction in their cast time. So you'll notice, for example, on the bow heavy attack, it reduced the cast time by a little more than half a second. So it's going to be faster now to spam bow heavy attacks. Just an example here. Two-handed heavy attacks, on the other hand, did not receive that cast time reduction. So they're still the slowest heavy attacks in the game right now. So that's basically kind of what they're doing here with heavy attacks and light attacks. Light attacks, more resource-oriented, trying to get resources back by light attacking. Heavy attacks are more damage-oriented, so you're getting more damage out of heavy attacks. Now, heavy attacks have already not done as much damage as light attacks. Attack builds in general do pretty low DPS when compared to light attack. So the heavy attack buffs, while it does end up buffing heavy attacks, probably is not going to buff heavy attacks as much as you think. So it's still going to be a punishment for both light attacks and heavy attack builds here. Light attack builds will see a significant drop because your light attacks don't do as much damage. Heavy attack builds, while they have probably seeing a buff here, you're not getting any more resources back, which was the main draw of the heavy attack build, getting back infinite sustain essentially. So both builds do see changes here. Moving on, partially charged heavy attacks no longer stun off balance enemies. Not a big deal for PvE because bosses can't be stunned. Light attacking off-balance enemies adds 5 stacks to your restore, bypassing natural 4 cap. You can see here that there's a lot of inconsistency with how many stacks you're getting from light attacking. Mend Wounds has been untouched, and they also mentioned that a lot of item sets, passive skills have received adjustments in order to keep their power levels the same after the changes to light and attacks. Most of these will be number adjustments, but some have received larger redesigns to fit the shift in light and heavy attacks. This is basically sort of a blanket statement saying, yeah, we know we made big changes, we're adjusting things as appropriate. Empower no longer increases light attack damage by 40%, and instead increases the damage of your next fully charged heavy attack by 2,500. It's going to call fully charged heavy attacks as heavy attacks from forward. Downway has also been changed, so it now grants Empower to 12 allies and is guaranteed to proc, but the cooldown has been increased to seconds. Whether or not this is a buff remains to be seen. So power was changed. If power was not changed in a vacuum, if it was just the Gallenway changes, this would be a huge buff. But because we have to take into consideration the power changes as well as the changes to light attack and damage and heavy attack damage, not 100% certain where Gallenway stands, whether this is a buff or a nerf. So kind of has to remain to be seen. Blood Moon has also been changed. Now it increases your light attack damage by 5738, a flat amount rather than a 55% bonus. Increase the duration to 10 seconds and the cooldown to 20 seconds, giving you a 50% uptime rather than 33% 5/15. And while active, you also reduce the amount of resources returned from your light attacks by 50%. Not a big deal. This is normally a werewolf build set anyways, where you're just light attack spamming, so again, not that big of a deal, that last point there. Botched Gladiator, this set now increases your weapon damage against targets under 25% health by 1475 rather than just your light and heavy attack weapon damage. A little bit of a change here, but definitely not making it any more viable because you're essentially playing without a 5-piece set from 100% health to 75% health, which generally speaking is going to be a longer portion of the fight, so still not a really set you're going to be seeing use of in PvP. Well, Akina has been completely revamped. So this set now grants Conductor, which reduces the cost of your abilities by 20%, but also reduces your weapon and spell damage by 511. Rather than granting Overkill, which increased the cost of your abilities by 8% and increased weapon and spell damage by 516. Stock condition still remains the same, so you still got to use 2 light attacks in a row. This is pretty interesting here. So reducing the cost of abilities does include cost of ultimate. So if you're a support role, Molekina might actually end up being pretty good if this changes to sticking. It's a big if there if the changes stick. Basically giving you 20% cost reduction on Warhorn. So if you're like say a DK tank, your base cost is 250 for Warhorn. When you get Conductor active, it's gonna drop down to 200 ultimate instead. So a pretty big drop if you think about it. So it is interesting that Molekina might actually be good for support roles in PvE rather than DPS. So definitely an interesting if it goes through. Queen's Elegance now causes light attacks to reduce the health, magic, or stamina cost of your next ability used by 10%, and your heavy attacks to increase the damage of your next direct damage attack by 2610, rather than a percentage increase to your light and heavy attacks. So kind of revamping that set a little bit there. Archmage increases your magicka regen by up to 369 for 10 seconds after dealing damage with a heavy attack, rather than granting just straight magicka. Ulfnor now increases the magicka or stamina you generate while light attacking by 120, rather than increasing the amount you get from a heavy attack. Again, just sort of revamping the set to kind of fit into the light attack equals resources, heavy attacks equals damage. Specific changes, Molten Armaments under DKs. The ability now increases damage by 3,000 for your heavy attacks rather than increasing it by 50% in order to kind of rebalance things, obviously. Sorcerer Bound Armaments no longer increases the damage of your light attacks by 10%. So just kind of a small nerf there for Bound Armaments. Under the weapons line, Forceful has been nerfed, causes your light and heavy attacks to splash for 12 or 25% of their damage instead of 25 or 50. Trifocus has similarly been nerfed, so your lightning heavy attacks splash for 12 to 25 rather than 50 to 100. And this is probably just to rebalance things based on the changes they made to light and heavy attack damage. Restoration Staff, Cycle of Life now causes your Restoration Light and heavy attacks to restore 1 or 2% of your missing magicka with a cap of 100 to 200 magicka, rather than causing your Restoration heavy attacks to restore more magicka. Heavy attacks don't restore magicka anymore, so gotta be passive. For the heavy armor line, Revitalize now causes your heavy attacks to restore up to 6 or 12% of their damage done as magicka or stamina based on the weapon type used, with a cap of 300 or 600 resources restore. So, at the very least, if you're a tank and you're heavy attacking, you get some back, not nearly as much as you normally on live. So on live, for example, your heavy attacks will get you, I believe it's around 2.4k stamina base before any sort of modifiers. This is a big nerf here to a heavy attack. So tanks, you're going to have to learn how to light weave, get your resources back up. Wirel's Pursuit, this passive now grants an additional 75 or 150 stamina per light attack rather than increase heavy attack restoration. Again, heavy attacks don't give resources back, so put that back onto light attacks instead. Finally, under the champion points line, under the tenacity, again, because heavy attacks don't restore resources anymore, they shifted over to light attacks instead. This CP passive now increases the magicka and stamina restore of your light attacks by up to 20% rather than increasing the magicka and stamina restore of your heavy attacks by up to. And that's pretty much everything under these patch notes. So what does this mean for builds? So again, trying to keep this as objective as possible. This is a DPS nerf pretty much across the board here. So anybody who was using a light heating build, which is pretty much most endgame DPS players, definitely going to see a big nerf if you don't make any sort of changes at all. Heavy attack builds will see a buff to damage, but you're going to see a huge nerf in sustain because now heavy attacks don't return resources at all. So that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, because the big focus of heavy attack builds is the fact that you have pretty much infinite sustain. You are giving up damage in order to do so. Now it seems it's being reversed now. Doing more damage, but you're losing on a lot of sustain if you do. So this is a pretty big shakeup here with how combat is done if these changes go through. There's no guarantee that these changes are going through. They're still looking back here. But in general, what you can expect to see, yes, nerf pretty much blanket across the board here. Now, as to my personal opinions on this, again, that's going to be coming out tomorrow because I do want to collect my thoughts, get some feedback, and do some testing on the PTS on my own before I come to any sort of conclusions about these changes. So that's pretty much going to call it for this video. Again, just sort of a brief summary and just sort of what to expect from these changes. The more subjective view is going to be coming tomorrow instead. As always, There's going to be a link in the description below to these patch notes as well as to the discords I mentioned earlier if you guys want to discuss these changes with some more endgame players. But in general, changes, just sort of a sneak peek for tomorrow, I'm not particularly happy with them, and I do think that ZOS's logic behind these changes is deeply flawed. So again, I do want to take some time to kind of ruminate on that before I give you guys my final opinion. But that concludes this video. Hopefully you guys found this informative. Let me know down in the comment section below what you guys think of this. Make sure to give feedback to ZOS, whether that is through the official forums or through the PTS/feedback ticket. Just make sure if you have strong opinions about these changes to give feedback. Again, ideally, you want to include some sort of experience or testing. You don't necessarily want to just go in and just start ranting about things. That's not how you get changes to happen. Should have some form of feedback based on your experiences on the PTS, whether that is actual raw parse numbers or, hey, I did this is kind of how I feel, etc., etc. Just make sure to have some semblance of objectivity when it comes to giving your feedback. Yes, you could always inject some of your subjective feelings into it, but make sure that it is 1, respectful, and 2, level-headed. That is the best way that you can get ZOS to kind of... That's it. Have a great rest of the week, guys. Make sure to stay safe, stay healthy with the coronavirus going on, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.